Thank you for joining today's Connection Point End Times News Briefing podcast. Today is Friday, October 20th, 2023. Hope you're all doing fantastic and having a wonderful day. In today's update, I just wanted to touch on a couple of interesting headline news, more or less dealing with the U.S. Preparation to use military force in the Middle East. One article talks about how U.S. prepares to use military force against Hezbollah if it joins the war against Israel, and this article came out of the Economic Collapse blog by Michael Schneider, and he says this: "We are witnessing an old-fashioned standoff in the Middle East right now. The IDF is supposed to have sent thousands of troops storming into Gaza by now, but the threats from Hezbollah and Iran have caused Israeli officials to pause. Do the Israelis want to fight an extremely bloody two-front war? Iran has actually brought up the possibility of a preemptive action, and that would inevitably spark a military response from the United States. Do the Iranians really want to fight the U.S. military? There's some that are hoping that the standoff would ultimately allow cooler heads to prevail, but I see it as the calm before the storm. After everything has happened, there's no way that Israel can allow Hamas to survive." And on Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu certainly did not sound like a man that he's ready to back down. While speaking alongside the German Chancellor at a news conference on Tuesday, described Hamas as the new Nazis and called on the world to unite and to eradicate terrorist organization in the same way it defeated the Nazis, end quote. During his remarks, Netanyahu also stated the atrocities of Hamas committed were the worst crimes committed against the Jews since the Holocaust. And so Hamas led forces across the Israeli-Gaza border on October 7th, slaughtering 1,400 Israeli men, women, children, and elderly in what has become the deadliest terror attack in Israel's history. The savagery we have witnessed perpetrated by the Hamas murderers coming out of Gaza were the worst crimes committed against the Jews since the Holocaust, Netanyahu said during the news conference. If the Israeli government was to decide not to invade Gaza, Netanyahu would almost inevitably be forced to resign in disgrace. The Israeli people want Hamas to be destroyed, and this means going into Gaza. But if that happens, it'll most likely a two-front war. In fact, Iran's foreign minister has even suggested that there could be a preemptive action even before the IDF sends troops purging into Gaza. And this report talks about how the possibility of a preemptive action by the resistance axis is expected in the coming hours, according to the foreign minister, said on a live broadcast to state TV, referring to his meeting with Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah on Saturday. Earlier on Monday, Iran's top diplomat and president said that the time's running out to reach a political solution and warned against the expansion of the Israel-Hamas war to other fronts. And he says that the resistance leaders will not allow Israel to do whatever it wants in Gaza, end quote. The Iranian leaders like to make dramatic statements, and like this author has never seen them talk quite like this. For example, you check out some of the other statements the Iran Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini made in the front of the entire world. He said this: "We must respond to what has happened in Gaza. The usurper Zionist regime must be prosecuted. This should be realized by those who want Iran to stop certain resistance groups, that they shouldn't have any expectations from us. All parties should refrain from asking anyone to prevent a group from taking steps in response to the crimes of the Zionists. Our numerous intelligence reports shows that the U.S. formulating the Zionist regime current policy and what is being done governing by the U.S. policy making. The U.S. must be held responsible for this situation. If the crimes of the Zionist entity continue, no one will be able to stand up to the Muslims and the resistant forces, and whatever crimes the Zionist regime commits will fail to compensate its disgraceful feat during the Alaska storm operation." So when the Israeli forces go into Gaza, they will. What will the Iranian response look like? Well, the first thing, as Michael is talking about here, he expects to happen is the Hezbollah to join the war, and that would mean a two-front war. The Israelis appear to be rapidly preparing for such scenario, and in fact, it would be reporting that the 20 towns and communities in the north of Israel are going to be evacuated. And so it talks about some of the different towns and the communities that would do that. And the good news is that the full-blown war between Israel and Hezbollah has not erupted yet. But Hezbollah is calling for a day of unprecedented anger on Wednesday. Lebanon's Hezbollah group denounced what was said was Israel's deadly attack on Gaza hospital, which we know is false. It was actually Hamas that did it. And so the attacks reveal the true criminal-faced entity and its sponsor, the U.S., which bears direct, complete responsibility for the massacre. And of course, that information was incorrect. As he's writing this article, there's reports of vast numbers of protesters heading toward the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. Needless to say that the events could spiral out of control very rapidly. If Hezbollah goes to war with Israel, the Biden administration has already discussed using military force against Hezbollah. The White House has been discussing the possibility of using military force if Hezbollah joins the war in Gaza and attacks Israel with its huge arsenal of rockets. 3 U.S. officials, one Israeli official with the acknowledgement of the situation, tells Axios. So once the U.S. starts bombing targets in Lebanon, there will be no turning back. All U.S. facilities and bases all over the Middle East will suddenly become targets for Islamic terrorists, and will likely see the terror attacks inside the United States as well. So going to war should not be done lightly. But Hezbollah, as we've even mentioned in previous reports, has at least 130,000 missiles ready to be fired at Israel. Once its large numbers of missiles start raining down on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, no U.S. president is just going to sit there and watch it happen. In fact, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has already told Arab leaders that we're not going to fool around. 2 U.S. officials said Secretary Blinken told Arab leaders that in whom he met on recent days, the U.S. is not fooling around by sending so military assets to the region in support of Israel. So at this hour, 2 U.S. aircraft carriers and thousands of troops are in the Middle East, Mediterranean, waiting for orders. According to this report, talks about how the United States is sending an amphibious task force of thousands of U.S. sailors and Marines toward Israel, where they'll be positioned aboard warships in case of the conflict where Hamas expands. 2 defense officials, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss the military movement, said on Monday at the amphibious ready group, numbering more than 4,000 sailors and Marines will join growing American fleets off the coast of Israel that will include 2 aircraft carriers and their associated escorted ships. The 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, based in Camp Lorraine in North Carolina, is deployed in the amphibious task force and trained for a wide array of missions, including some special operations. The U.S. Bataan and the U.S. Carter Hall, 2 of the warships carrying personnel from the unit were from the Gulf of Oman on Monday, having left Kuwait recently after the Hamas unprecedented attacks across the border, attacks on Israel on October 7th. So we really think that they're on the brink of a hot phase of World War III. Once Israeli troops move into Gaza, we're going to see who was bluffing and who was not. And unfortunately, I think it will be quickly realized that almost all the threats being made on both sides are actually real. The Great Middle East War is here, and it's going to be extremely bloody. So, interesting article, and we're just going to have to see how things pan out. We're hoping for peace and for a peace agreement eventually, but you can't make peace with a terrorist group. They're just going to regroup and continue to attack. Also, another report in dealing with the U.S. military, the U.S. Mount Whitney heading to eastern Mediterranean. So this came out of the Navy Times, and it says that the U.S. Sixth Fleet Command Control ship Mount Whitney is heading to the eastern Mediterranean Sea to support U.S. operations there. The Navy announced on Wednesday as tensions escalate the region amidst war between Israel and Palestinian group Hamas. The Italian-based flagship left Wednesday and will join the other U.S. assets, including 2 aircraft carrier groups, strike groups, and an amphibious assault ship already dispatched to the Middle East or the Eastern Mediterranean to support Israel to halter conflict from erupting. The Sixth Fleet did not specify what Mount Whitney would be doing once it arrived on station, but the 52-year-old Mount Whitney serves as a command ship supporting sophisticated command, control, communications, and intelligence capabilities, according to the Navy, and it allows to embark commander, direct air, ground, maritime units from one location and can move and process large amounts of data. So interesting to see more of the development of the positioning of the U.S. military and the ships within the Mediterranean Sea. Another news items also dealing with the U.S. and Israeli embassies, that how many of them are under attack. And so the threat level is extremely high. One article talks about how U.S. warned not to travel to Lebanon as part of Beirut embassy is set on fire. Another article talks about how U.S. Israeli embassies in Argentina evacuated after bomb threats, according to a report. And there's also emerging threats in Europe spark security concerns in the wake of Israeli-Hamas war. So you see this uneasiness, lack of peace globally throughout the world. It's getting more intense. The evilness of the war, the evilness of anti-Semitism, and the hatred toward Israel, the hatred and violence of Islam is running rampant throughout the world. It's unsafe no matter what country you live in. So we need to be watchful and informed and prepared and grounded in the Word. We need to keep our eyes on the Lord. And may we be these prayer warriors in these end times to continue to be praying for the salvation of all, to be praying for our loved ones, to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, and that people would come to know Jesus before it's too late. So keep pressing on, my friends. Until next time, God bless.